Hi, I'm Mr. Wahlberg, and I'm glad you're here. Today we're going to resume our discussion of the Introduction to Forensic Speech with Part 3, the book and draw events. We have 3 objectives today. By the end of this video, you should be able to log into your NSDA and Tabroom accounts. You should be able to describe the events of Interp of Poetry and Interp of Prose, as well as the program of oral interpretation. And number 10, you should be able to describe the events United States or International Extemporaneous Speaking and Impromptu. But let's begin on Roman numeral number 8. NSDA is the National Speech and Debate Association, and you have an account at speechanddebate.org. Now, to do this, you're going to need to use your St. James Academy login. I have created the account for you, or at least I have set up your NSDA membership, but you need to get your login. So basically, you need to use your St. James Academy email address as whatever your login is. Now, your membership has already been created, but not your logins to do so. That one's up to you. You'll be able to track your own points and to look up some information on competitors for events. I think the best way to do this is to go and hit the forget password and then just sort of watch your email from there. I will say that if you hit this a whole bunch, you're going to come up the works on it. So, hit your forget the password and then go check your St. James Gmail accounts from there, and you'll be able to get it going. You get points by competing in tournaments, by doing performances. So more points are earned by getting better scores for those performances. And if you want to see how the points rack up, the list of points is online at speechdebate.org /honor-society. At least that's what the link is at the time I'm recording this video. You know how the internet goes. Now, if a novice earns 75 points, and remember, a novice is a person in their first year of competition. If a novice earns 75 points at St. James Academy, or an advanced player earns 100 points at St. James Academy, they are eligible to win a varsity letter. So even freshman forensicators can get a varsity letter in this game, but you got to get 75 points to do so. Any player who reaches the degree of special distinction, that's 500 points. It's the pink seal on your certificates. It'll take a while to get there. It may take you a couple of seasons to get there. But if you get 500 points, then you have earned the right at St. James Academy to wear the NSDA honor cords at graduation, which is pretty cool. Now, tournaments, so that's your NSDA membership, and you're going to need to log in to do that. Tournaments are typically managed on a different website called tabroom.org. This site is named after a physical room at debate tournaments that is the tabulation room. And so tabroom.com is the online version of what actually happens in a real place. Tabroom software will assign tournament rounds. Most tournaments use Tabroom. Not everyone does. It's not like a requirement, so some schools have their own method, and that's fine too. But when it's used at tournaments, it's going to assign all of the rooms where you're going to compete. And it's the online scorekeeper for it as well. This one's a little trickier actually than the speech and debate login. So you will use the logins that you set up for speechanddebate.org on Tabroom because NSDA essentially owns Tabroom. And so you click the sign up link at the top. You're going to enter your NSDA credentials to create a login. If for some reason that doesn't work, let me know. You might need to create a complete account. Once you get logged in, you're going to use all of the fields, including the one about the time zone and cell phone provider. So you're going to need to put those things in as well. If you don't, then Tabroom won't quite work correctly. So go ahead and put in all the required information. Your email address at the top of the page is the home button. Tabroom.com is an interesting website. It's very powerful. I actually really like the website. It's not very intuitive. The thing you're thinking and clicking as the home doesn't take you to a very functional home page. You're going to click your email at the top, and that's what takes you as the home button. Good luck. You'll figure it out, or not. I'll help you figure it out, but it takes a little experience. Don't beat yourself up. Roman numeral number 9. Now, I want to talk about some of the events. So the events here are, the first we're going to talk about is the book events. Book events are not memorized events, and they're not, improvising the events. There are books that use a script and that you use it in performance. There are 3 of these events. The first one is oral interpretation of poetry. Poetry in Kansas uses a different set of rules than what other states will use. We have a Kansas-specific set of rules for our poetry competition, and the Kansas State High School Activity Association describes it as thus. Poetry is writing which expresses ideas, experience, or emotion through the creative arrangement of words according to their sound, their rhythm, and their meaning. Poetry relies on verse and stanza form. So that's really what we're looking for what makes poetry verse and stanza. It includes song lyrics, at least in Kansas. Now, it's a little unclear if some books which are written in verse but are storytelling books count as poetry or prose, and a lot of times it's at the interpretation of the tournament host. For instance, Dr. Seuss books. Some people like to perform them as poetry. Some people like to perform them as prose. There's not a real clear definition of either one. So yeah, if you have your heart set on something like that, let's talk about it before you get going on it. This poetry is a Kansas-only event. NSDA considers it a supplemental event, which is fun, but we'll use the Kansas rules for most of our season here. Performances must be used from a manuscript. You have to actually read it from a text. Now, the manuscript may be an integral part of the performance. For instance, I had a student a couple of years ago that they needed to have a knocking on their piece, like somebody was knocking on the door, and they picked up their book and knocked on the book, and that's the way that you were able to use the manuscript as an integral part of the piece. No props are allowed in poetry, but you do get the book, right? Responsive use of the body is permissible, and it's actually like kind of expected. You should be emoting with your body, like it's part of your interpretation instrument. Use your body as your instrument. As long as the active use of the body is appropriate to the demands of the selection, and it's a natural outgrowth from the literature being performed. You're not really allowed to move in Kansas rules of poetry. You do have a small step for transitions, but in general, imagine that your feet are kind of sunk into concrete. That's not actually how the rules work, but that's kind of what the expectations will be. The contestant will be evaluated on all the interpretation technique, the breathing, the tone, the pitch, the enunciation, the phrasing, the pace, etc., but also your artistry, your ability to characterize your people in the story, in the poetry, vocal characterization, etc. Oral interpretation of poetry is typically a fairly heavy event that deals with some really serious topics. It's not required to do so, but that's kind of what we usually see out of the poetry event. Light themes, while they're allowed by the rules, don't generally seem to do well in competition. Poetry in Kansas is a 5 to 7 minute event. The rules don't specifically specify a minimum, but our program is the expectations of at least 5 minutes to do so. Now, the second of these categories is is oral interpretation of prose, which again has Kansas rules. There are some national rules and some variations in different states. We're going to focus on the Kansas rules here. Prose expresses thought through language in sentences and in paragraphs, which distinguishes it. I talk for a living. Okay, but distinguishes it from what you're doing with poetry, which is in verse and stanza form. Prose includes fiction, which could be short stories or novels. It could be nonfiction, articles, essays, journals, biographies, etc. It is specifically prohibiting plays, so no play scripts or any kind of similar material is used. Original material published in a local high school publication, such as a newspaper, a literary mag, or a yearbook, is prohibited. So even if you have submitted some prose, this is also true for poetry. If you have submitted something that you really like and it got published in our high school literary mag, that's awesome. You can't use it for competition. It's got to be considered like fair game for anybody to get the piece for it. But essentially everything else is just like poetry, and they're very similar events. Now, prose in the last few years has trended towards pretty heavy material. It's again not required, and there's a little more variation you see in the prose world, but a lot of the prose stuff is some pretty serious stuff and some pretty heavy themes onto it. Subpoint C, I want to talk about kind of a unique event called the Program of Oral Interpretation. Now, this one, the Kansas rules and the national rules are very similar on this one. So let's use the NSDA description. POI, as it's referred to as, the Program of Oral Interpretation. They call it POI. POI uses a combination of poetry and prose and drama. Basically, any type of literary text can be used. You actually need to use multiple texts together. And then you construct a program. Like you take a section of a poem and a section of a play and a section of an essay, and you weave them together, and sometimes you go back to the poem, and sometimes you go back to the whatever. Sometimes you have an anchor piece that you're going to it, but it's a variety of types. You can't just do poetry. You can't just do prose onto it. The cuttings need to roughly give equal time to the different genres. So if you've got like a mix of poetry and drama, like play scripts, they should be roughly equal proportions to it. Though you might come from multiple sources. You might use several pieces of poetry in there and one anchor text of a play, something like that. The pieces are linked together with a theme, and the most successful ones, really, when we see POI done well, you're trying to use it persuasively. I think that's the way we want to approach it. This is like an oratory. It's a persuasive speech, but you're using other people's material to construct it together. It becomes a literary and artistic effort to be convincing. Like the others, poi is often some pretty heavy themes because it is persuasive and because it is artistic and literary. It really serves serious themes very well. They don't have to be. They could be lighter themes. They tend to be pretty heavy themes, and that's really one of the powers of poi is they can handle really serious topics through an artistically interesting way to do so. Focus on argumentation and performance range. Poi should really show your ability to combine multiple genres together around a single theme. You're expected to portray multiple characters, like we saw with our interpretation stuff from our previous video. You should be able to portray multiple characters. Again, no costumes or props may be used except for the manuscript, and you are kind of expected to be able to use. It's a black book piece. It's a book. It doesn't have to be a black book. It's a book piece, and you are usually expected to use the book in your work. Performances also include an introduction, which are written by the student to contextualize the performance. It states the titles and or the authors of the program. It's a long one. It's an 8 to 10 minute length. And like the others, there's not specifically a minimum, but I need to see you go for at least 8 minutes on that one. And Roman numeral number 10, we're going to do kind of a different sort of topic, and these are the unscripted events. So these are the things that don't specifically have you haven't memorized a script or a piece to perform with. The unscripted events, and here we have two different kinds of extemporaneous speaking and one and impromptu. Let's do with the extemps first. So point A, let's talk about the extemporaneous speaking. There's two categories of extemp. There's United States extemp and international extemp, and it's the topics if they deal with domestic topics or international topics on it. To adapt the NSDA's description in extemporaneous speaking events, students are presented with the choice of 3 questions related to current events, and they, in 30 minutes, prepare a 7-minute speech answering the selected question. So students get 30 minutes to prepare for their speech. So like you go and it's draw, and they say when it's time, they say code 47, or they'll say Wahlberg from St. James. Draw time, and you go up to the little desk and you got an envelope or a basket or some kind of a bucket or something, and you pull out 3 questions, or sometimes there are 3 questions on a card and they just like give you the card, whatever it is, but you look at all 3 of them and you say, I'm gonna do the middle one, and you put the other 2 back in the envelope, something like that. And so so you draw those out, and then you have 30 minutes to go prepare your speech on it. You typically, kind of what we break that down into, 18 to 20 minutes is used for research and outlining your points, and then 10 to 12 minutes to go practice it out loud. People do not try to write the full text of a speech. They work out of outlines for this. You try to use multiple quotations from experts. You get the entirety of the internet to go build this and see what journalists are saying or experts on the topic. Students, you're not expected to be an actual expert on any topic. You are expected to be a fast researcher. You are expected to find materials quickly. The longer you do extemp, the more you see some recurring themes, and so you've got your politics and elections questions, which become perennial questions for an entire election year. Or you have some things that are topical. That's if there's an ongoing war in the world, you'll come up with that war a few times. That's pretty typical of what the event gets to. So those are 7-minute speeches. At some tournaments, you are allowed to use a note card. What we find is that it's very hard to be competitive while using a note card. It varies, and different tournaments have different expectations on it, but in general, we find that a note card is about the only way to be competitive on it. When it's allowed by the rules, St. James extempors may use a note card during their first 3 tournaments. We really want you weaned off the note card by the end of the second tournament. The experienced extempors are once you've been past your second or third tournament. No note card. We're taking the training wheels off. Don't worry, you can do it. People do it all the time, and it's hard, but you can do it. It's possible. Those are 5 to 7 minutes in length. Again, there's not actually a minimum, but I want you to go at least 5 minutes, and 7 minutes is better. The last type of event we're going to talk about here is impromptu. Now, impromptu is unlike all of the other events. It's also a draw event or a limited prep event, and in the Kansas High School Activities Association describes it this way: the impromptu speech is an original interpretation by the speaker of the designated topic as supported by varied materials and gives the contestant the opportunity to be creative and imaginative. So likewise, students will pick from an envelope, usually an envelope. They pick out 3 topics, and you get 5 minutes to prepare for a speech. The specific rules of tournaments vary, but in general, impromptuers do not get any notes. You might be able to take some reference materials into, if you've got you'll see people take a notebook, maybe some popular quotations or something like that, and you get your category. So let's say that the category is Disney princesses, and you reach in the envelope and you pull out a Cinderella and a Moana and a Tiana. And you're like, okay, well, which of these am I going to do? Everybody knows Cinderella. Tiana's like my favorite. Moana's an interesting character. You say, okay, Princess and the Frog was a great show. It's a little dated now. People might know Moana better. So you're like playing your odds. Like, what can I talk about? What will the judge know something about as well? So you're going to go with Moana, and you get about 5 minutes to kind of prepare what you're going to do. And maybe the tournament allows, and maybe you have some prep material that you've got a list of Disney characters. So you're like flipping through and find the Moana stuff. And you're going to go with it from there. Or maybe it's nothing. Maybe you don't have any prep materials and you're just working up in your head, and you got to think about, how do I make a speech out of this? It's kind of like extemp. You're expected to like make a speech out of it. So you need to have a thesis statement and work around, and you've got some speech skills. This is my first thing I'm going to consider. This is my first point of analysis. This is my second point of analysis, or this is our first topic and our second topic, whatever it is. You need to construct a speech out of it, something that somebody could outline. And then you give a 5-minute speech on that topic. You get 5 minutes to prepare, and then you give a 5-minute speech. Impromptu is a very good event for people that have 3 minutes on every topic. If you're one of those sort of like generalists that knows about 3 minutes about a lot of stuff, but maybe not in depth about a lot of things, welcome to Impromptu. That's going to be great for you. Good speeches make every topic make a topic sentence. Like they've got a thesis, they've got some 3 subtopics with a really good example of each. That makes a really nice extemp speech. That draws back with a conclusion. Really good speeches are tying in famous quotations or making connections to related or unrelated topics that still, serve what your thesis statement is. Impromptu topics may include things like idioms and proverbs, abstract words, events, quotations, famous people, or whatever the host school wants to throw in it, basically. Nobody knows everything. If you do extemp long enough, and maybe even the first time, you're going to walk in and you're like, ooh, man, I don't know any of this, which is fine. Not everybody knows everything. But there are some great strategies for stuff that you don't know what to talk about, and we could talk about those in person. So that's what we got today for book events. Book events are poetry, prose, and poi, and draw events, which is international extemp, United States extemp, and then impromptu. I love this game. I can't wait to tell you more about it. Make sure you like and subscribe. God bless you.